Good evening, everybody. Thank you guys for attending this workshop. Once again, it's for sustainability and green building. We want to teach you guys about insulation, energy codes. So we do have the chief building official here on site for any questions. We do have Steve Shaw, architect, for any of his expertise. And then we have our presenter, which is Sandra. And she will be doing her presentation with some correspondence from Steve Shaw as well. So please hold any questions, conversations to the end of the presentation, just so we can keep it moving. We will have tables afterwards, so you can meet with us one-on-one if you have any personal questions, stuff like that, anything that you guys want to get more technical with. Anything? Shaw, you want anything?
Without further ado.
Good.
Thank you. All right, who wants to move up closer? Anybody? Come on, we're not that scary. So my name's Sandra McCardell, and I'm really grateful to Los Alamos for having the foresight to try to make sure that all of you are more aware of why building codes are important, what the energy building code is, and to answer your questions. I work in different parts of the state, and there is nobody I've run into who is as good as these folks here at saying, come talk to us. We want to make sure we all understand the same thing. So not only that, they also provide food for talks. So, hey, it's a pretty good deal. We're going to go through, and we have a slide presentation. We're going to go through and talk about that. I'm trying to figure out where the best place is to stand. Steve and I are going to be going through the presentation. We're going to be tag teaming. We'll probably be throwing things at each other, saying, I wanted to say that. So maybe it's good you're not standing too far in the front. But our goal is to go through and talk about a little bit about the backgrounds on sustainable buildings. And Abby's going to talk about utility goals. And then we're going to also have a discussion Q&A after that. And then there are tables out in the hallway for more information, or you can grab any of us. Sound fair? All right. Next slide. Can you guys really see that? Okay, you have better eyes than I do. When I started in this field years ago, it was called energy conservation, and then it was called energy efficiency. And I prefer to talk about energy effectiveness, because if you talk about energy conservation, you're just trying to reduce the use. If you talk about energy efficiency, you're trying to use what you're using more efficiently. But really, what you want to do is do what you want to do. You want to heat your home. You don't want to heat it necessarily efficiently or conserve anything. You just want your home nice and toasty, and you don't want to waste any of the energy that you're using for that. When I first wrote this, I was watching my neighbor with his nephew, and they were trying to dig a hole. And the neighbor was sitting there, digging the shovel in, throwing the dirt out. And it was nice and efficient. He was digging right in. The dirt was going where it was supposed to go. His nephew was a little different. He was just kind of digging anywhere, and the dirt was flying everywhere. And by the end of it, he was exhausted. So that would not be effective use of energy. Although since he was 10 or 11, it probably was a better idea than anything else he could have gotten into trouble with. So you can see in the graphic there, one of the points to make is that from the point of view, from the point where the energy is produced all the way through, you can see that there are energy losses all along the way. And so a ton of coal or a ton of whatever that's used to produce your energy, you only get about 20% of it. The rest of it is lost along the way for various reasons. So when you reduce even a little bit of the energy you use to be more effective in what you're doing, that reduces it many times over back to the source. Steve, do you want to
Sure.
add to that? Just hit me when you want to.
Okay. A couple of things that occurred to me are not only the heating loads, but the cooling loads. And as we get further and further into this global warming event, I think people are, especially in climates like ours, where we normally have 4 seasons, we may have 3.5 or 2.5 seasons eventually. And getting prepared for these upcoming possible scenarios is a very important thing. And part of our efforts here are going to be directed to some of the local general contractors as well as the general public. And I think today's effort is to try to kind of get the word out to the community that, we are exploring what these various possibilities are for Los Alamos. And as technology changes, the codes have to follow suit with technology. And, some people are going to say, well, gee, why do I really care about the code? But the fact of the matter is, if the product you're either thinking about inventing or the product you're thinking about using, if it's not been approved by the code, don't use it. It may be great technology, but there is a real learning curve that has to happen with the ICC, the International Code Council, and they look at these things and they look at different events and they try to come up with reasonable protections for us, for the general public, in utilizing these certain products. So there are more layers to this whole thing than just putting more insulation in your house. Also, as an architect, I am supposed to look outside the box, and a lot of times a solution can be found especially at a residential scale. A lot of times, if a house is too warm or too cold, there are ways to change that without even touching your heating system. For instance, if you reduce the volume of the inside of your house, if you've got an attic in your house and the attic sucks the heat out of your house and your insulation is up at the roof, then you're basically heating the attic. So if you want your heating or cooling system to work more effectively, insulate the ceiling. Put the insulation at the ceiling, let your attic go cold. And then there are other techniques of retrofitting, and some of those will fit a little bit nicer with commercial type buildings, and that would be insulating existing walls and such. But there are so many new technologies out there, and I'll touch on some of those later as we get further into the presentation. But other things that go hand in hand with getting a permit is making sure that it meets the codes. And if you're not aware of it, as users of the various building codes, we have a library of codes that we have to adhere to. So it's no easy to keep up to speed with what the codes are doing. But I think pretty much the technology that we have available here in Los Alamos is all approved by the code.
Why don't you keep, go back? We'll let Steve talk to, may want to talk to us some more of those principles, Steve, since you had started on those.
Well, okay, let's just start at the top. Utilizing indigenous materials oftentimes can be a cost savings, but if you take the scenario of adobe, when us gringos came to New Mexico, it was easy to get an adobe structure built because it was readily available and labor was cheap. And then when the energy crisis hit us in the 70s, people started looking at the thermal values of building materials. And as soon as that happened and people figured out that, a 12-inch adobe wall and a 6-inch frame wall, which is cheaper? And of course, the adobe people left money on the table, so they raised their prices. So, oftentimes, depending on what sort of indigenous materials you're planning on using, they can oftentimes be more expensive. But it's worth checking to see. Again, number two, if you're talking about the building envelope, if you can reduce the volume of the building envelope, you're going to increase your heating and cooling capabilities. Obviously, citing the structure is an important aspect of the overall efficiency of the building. And, a lot of times, I know with the laboratory and the somewhat at the county, usually you get some sort of an indication from the client about what they want and what they don't want. And oftentimes in the private sector, we don't get that. Usually a laboratory project has functional and operational requirements that are dictated by the users. And so getting everything coordinated with the user group and getting that down to the level of the general contractor is a bit of an effort, but usually common sense is a pretty good indicator. Oftentimes if any of you are familiar with the Research Park building at TA3, it has a vaulted roof on it. And the problem that was encountered with that particular project was the design team did not take into account that the snow off the vaulted roof falls on the sidewalk where people who are trying to get into the building walk. And so that sidewalk sometimes becomes unwalkable in the winter months. And that is a direct failure of paying attention to site selection. The other thing with solar storage is, if you're talking about electricity, a lot of people are trying to get it affordable into their home. And so they're not looking at any sort of a battery storage system. They're simply making electricity when the sun shines, and they're selling any excess to the county. And but if the sun doesn't shine or something goes down, if there's a general power outage in a particular part of town, you're not going to have power to back you up. So generally speaking, when I'm working with clients, they're talking about having an active storage type system. And currently, you know, batteries are a big thing right now. We've got electric cars and vehicles, and so there's some inherent problems with some of these battery systems. The most popular system I have put in was an antiquated system that used submarine batteries, wet cell submarine batteries. And so while that works, they are large, they are heavy, and they do produce hydrogen gas. And so there is some, you have to be a little bit careful on where you put your switching gear and where you are producing the hydrogen. Um, so obviously, number 5 goes back to kind of number 3. Siting is very important when designing a building and knowing what the climate conditions are for that location. So there is an effort now in some of the industries. The one that comes to mind in my head is aluminum decking. This aluminum decking now, I think it's called dry lock or lock dry, I never get it right. It's capable of, it first of all is manufactured with recycled aluminum, and it can be recycled when you're done with it. If it is, if you are done with it in your lifetime, it's waterproof. It collects all the water that falls on it, so it has to slope, and the code requires, I think, on a deck. David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is the pitch 8 inch per foot for decks, or does it have to be the same as roofs? I'm talking about aluminum, those aluminum decks, and they have to slope to drain. But they're a walking surface. Do they have to slope 1/4 inch per foot, or can they slope 1/8? But that's a roof. But what about a walking deck? Okay, well, in any case, it's a great system, and it is a recycled material, and it's capable of being recycled. Some of the things that can normally be recycled take a beating in Los Alamos because of our UV, and so be cautious about things like vinyl windows and vinyl siding, things like that. They're not going to hold up. So anyway, I think that pretty much ties in the architectural aspect of this of the basic 7 principles. The other thing to not forget is landscaping. Landscaping is a real important part of sustainability across the board. And so, you know, putting in an ocean of river rocks in your front yard is like putting in a gigantic heat battery. And so, you know, you can run the trade-off, and you can do it in your own head. Is watering your lawn, keeping your house 15 degrees cooler because you watered your lawn, is that cheaper than putting in an expensive HVAC system to cool your house down? And we'll get into some of that passive heating and cooling a little later on.
Thanks, Steve. I think the only thing I want to add to this slide is just really quickly, as we are all more than aware, costs are increasing everywhere for services, for products, for anything we spend money on. And so one of the things to do is to make sure that everything in your house is pulling its own weight. So, you know, you're going to be spending more for it than you would have 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago. So make sure it does what you want it to do. Thank you. So where does energy come from anyway? It's harnessing the power of nature, whether that is electricity or water or the coal that we pull out of the ground, or the oil. My sister, who's a geologist, says she doesn't know why I focus on energy efficiency, because after all, oil and gas and coal are renewable. I'm like, yeah, but not on my time frame. So, they were put there a very long time ago. And so whatever they are, we try to harness them for our purposes. And sometimes Mother Nature doesn't really like being harnessed. So that's where we get to climate change. It's obviously something that we're all talking about in various ways. Said sister does not believe in it. I'm sure many other families are split in that way. But what the concept is that as the world changes, that means as different parts of the world heat up, other parts cool down. That changes wind patterns, ocean patterns, rainfall patterns. And that is what's going to change our world for the foreseeable future. And we just haven't been there. We don't know what it's looking like. That also is changing design parameters. So, as we warm up here in New Mexico, one of the things that happens is we don't get as cold at night as we used to. That changes a design parameter. So one of the things that energy codes are trying to do is to move towards what we're thinking is going to be happening 5 years, 10 years down the road. So you don't have to go out in 2 years and say, oh my gosh, this piece of equipment I got, it was fine then, but it's not fine now. And you can see a lot of the climate change effects there. And last time I went past Elephant Butte, I struggled to find it. So I haven't been by for the last couple of months. Go ahead. So buildings are both part of the problem and part of the solution. There's about 40% of energy use is used in buildings. And that means that if we work on reducing that 40% in various ways, we can be part of the solution. There are a couple of methodologies where people try to look at how we can solve this problem. Project Drawdown, which is the left side, they talk about how we can draw down the carbon and other particulates in the atmosphere, how we can draw that down so that we don't have as much global warming. There are various types of wedges that say, hey, we've got the technologies out there. If we just work on them methodically, we can do that as well. Did you want to talk about?
Yeah. Regarding carbon capture, we have here in little Los Alamos a company called Spiritus Technologies, and they are doing carbon capture, and they're extracting it from the air, and they're condensing it into a solid, and it will be buried in played out oil wells in Wyoming. This little company Matt couldn't be here this evening, but I have talked to him, and he would be happy to come to another meeting. We're hoping to follow this up with another meeting sometime in the future, and Matt can talk about that. But it's an active, it is an active system now that is going on. They have developed their prototypes, and they're going to be going to market pretty quick. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of innovation going on in this. As people are realizing the scale of the problem, there's a lot going on. I'm sure there's a lot going on up here. So The another word that we talk about a lot is sustainability. And it's not my favorite word because it's overused, but I haven't figured out a better one. And so the definition that I have is that it's an ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time, whatever that process is. So it shouldn't negatively affect the environment, the neighbors, the people in the building. And you want to minimize both what goes into the building or the process and the ongoing costs. So in a building, how do you build it, and what do you spend to operate and maintain it? So it goes beyond energy. You can look at the little stacks on the right-hand side, and that is U.S. energy consumption by source and by sector in 2022. Residential is about 16% of that, and then you can see the sources that it comes from. We'll look at a different diagram that's maybe a little easier to see later on. Do you want to? Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is my favorite diagram. It's called a Sankey diagram, and this one's produced by the Department of Energy. But on the far left side, you can see all the sources of energy, and then what they're used for in the middle, and then what they're intended to do in the pink. So if you look at the types of fuel and then where they're used, which is a little hard to see, one thing to notice is that large gray block is what's wasted. So if you collect all the things that actually do work together, they're in that small black piece on the bottom, but the large gray on the top is wasted at all points along the way. Household energy, we don't have the waste part in there, but you can see that if you're spending, say, $1,900 a year in utility costs, the largest amount is heating and cooling. And then you can see where the others come in. So that's one of the reasons that Steve's been talking a lot about insulation and landscaping and so on. A lot of that affects the heating and cooling. Again, this is hard to see. It's a little far away, but the idea here is, and I think this is going to be recorded, so should you want to look at it later, you'll be able to do that. But the idea here is if you have a car and it dies and you need to go out and get another one, we're familiar with looking at the trade-off between the cost of your car and the miles per gallon. So often you'll pay more to buy a car that is more fuel efficient than one that is less fuel efficient because you balance the first cost versus the operating cost. That same approach can be used in your home. So your first cost, you may have to pay more to put this thing in that's going to save you energy, but in the long run, it'll save you. And if your energy cost is low, probably doesn't make a huge difference, but as energy costs go up, it makes more and more difference. And so there are numbers in here that showcase that.
I'll go ahead and jump in here now with a little bit about photovoltaic systems and their relative costs. Bear in mind, if you buy a photovoltaic system and put it on your roof, which most people want to do, you're going to have to remove that collection system if you have to replace your roof. And so you better put that in the overall costs. You're also going to have to climb up on the roof. You're also going to have to prove to the county that your roof is capable of supporting that collection system. And so also, in general, putting penetration through your roof membrane is always a bad idea. So if you have the room, and some people do and some don't, a ground-mounted photovoltaic system ultimately is much easier to service. It's much easier to replace. It's much easier to clean. In some applications, the collectors need to be protected from the summer sunshine. If they're a liquid collecting system, oftentimes during the summer, you will superheat that water and it'll blow up your collectors. So there's some things to be concerned about with that. So going with a photovoltaic system that does not have a storage is going to be a cheaper option to get started with. But as Sandra was saying, sometimes if you start with something that's a little less expensive and add the bells and whistles as you go, then you can end up with a first-class system that you didn't have to lay out all the money for in the very beginning. So think about that too.
Why don't you keep it, because the next slide.
Interesting. High performance buildings. Back when we found the sun again, the ancients knew all about it, but it took until the 70s until we figured out it's pretty important to start thinking about. And so coming down the pike, initially the effort in solar energy was to collect as much of it as you could. And as things advance and technology advanced, things changed a little bit, and the overpowering the house with passive solar had its problems too. You can overdo it. And so then people started trying to figure out, how do you temper things? How do you make it so it's comfortable and not blazing hot for the middle of the day and colder than hell at night? And so they started refining things like air infiltration, how much air seeps around the cracks of your windows and doors, and where does the air come from in the house? And so then all of a sudden, now we've got these really tight houses, and they're unhealthy because you're keeping all that air inside the house, and people are breathing already breathed air. It's not a healthy environment. And so now we start going back and reintroducing fresh air into the house. So the problem then becomes, how do you get fresh air into the house without getting the cold air? Well, the answer is a heat exchanger, and a very simple air-to-air heat exchanger takes the inside air and cools it off by bringing the cold air from outside and warming it up as you're exhausting the old air out and you're bringing the new air in. It's getting preheated by the old air. So that's a real cost-effective way of getting the air changes, which is important for your health. So high-performance buildings are coming online now. We don't want to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and roll up the shades that are down on the south-facing windows, because it's too much work, and this is the 21st century, and why should we have to do that? but you can still do that. And so if you want to have a state-of-the-art system that doesn't cost like a state-of-the-art system, guess what? Your sweat equity is going to make it that way. And so there's some cost trade-offs there. How much do you want to be involved in the heating and cooling of your space, your environment? So those are things to be considered too. And again, there's a whole subset of other things that go along hand in hand with energy conservation and smart design. And like I said before, landscaping and shading and orientation and all that stuff, it turns out is pretty darn important.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks. Okay, now we're on to energy codes, which is the exciting topic for this evening. And, you know, they are important. Number one, they're enforceable law, so they're important for that reason. Number two, they're moving the bar forward. So, you know, they're a way of incentivizing or rewarding or whatever they are, punishing those who don't move forward. But they are a set of requirements for constructing a building legally. There are minimum consistent levels. So, you know, everybody's got to do at least this. You're welcome to do a whole lot more. And there are some people who do a whole lot more, but everybody's got to do at least this thing. And they address all aspects of the building. This is what Steve's been talking about, the building envelope, the mechanical, service water, heating, lighting, and electric power. And those are different parts of the code. They also, going beyond that, improve a building's resilience and the ability to shelter in place as that is built into the code, so that becomes something that's more important. They are developed by the ICC, which is an independent body. They develop these codes, and then that's a model code, which is potentially adopted by a jurisdiction, in this case, New Mexico. And then because Los Alamos enforces its own code, Los Alamos has adopted that code as well, but New Mexico made changes during the adoption. And every place around the country has that choice to make. So we're in with a whole bunch of other states who have adopted this 2021 code. Thanks. There are lots of different reasons for codes to be put in place. They can be a response to external forces. Steve's going to talk to that in a little bit. And public safety. Also fairness. You know, this beach is mine because I paid money for it. Nobody else can go on this beach. They're to keep people out of things that are dangerous. They also can accomplish policy objectives. So those little circles relate to the fact that there's a lot of wind in some parts of New Mexico. So there's a lot of resource potential, but there's a smaller circle that is market potential, because you got to capture that wind, you got to sell it somewhere. Who's going to buy it without the interconnection? So the policy objectives try to turn that resource into something that has a market. Steve, do you want to continue on?
Yeah, there has been some movement toward creating energy farms. And these are not only photovoltaic or wind driven. What they're talking about is wind driven, sticks way up in the air. The collector system can be mounted on the ground, and a collector system that collects sunshine to either heat a liquid or to make electricity is also capable of capturing water. And so that water can be captured by the photovoltaic array, and it can be siphoned off and put into a storage system. So these energy farms not only can produce electricity via the sun and the wind, but they can capture water to water plants on the farm. And so, you know, in the future, I think we're going to see agriculture and energy production merging more and more.
Thank you. Now, just because we're talking here about energy codes, just remember there are a whole bunch of other codes, some of which are referenced in the energy code. But please feel bad for your building officials because they need to know all of these and more in great gory detail. And then they have to make sure that all of us comply with them. You know, the green construction code, the water conservation code, green plumbing, mechanical code, air quality, Americans with disabilities, groundwater, zoning laws, and they all interrelate and they all interact. Some states are more stringent, some are less so, but they're all an attempt to make sure that the buildings we live in are safe and resilient and don't fall down around our heads. All right. We're going to go back in history a little bit. Well, maybe more than a little bit. You know, if you our way back ancestors did not have building codes, and you know, some of them probably lived in bark shelters like that, or built small shelters as they were going from point A to point B. And then communities started becoming more settled, agriculture developed, and people made adaptations to the climate, to the geography. And then over time, buildings were also made for specialized purposes. So you'd have, over the years, the size, the height, and the span increased because better engineering and materials allowed that. But as we were discussing the other day when we were planning this, a lot of those buildings were probably engineered by trial and error. So, you know, the Romans, the Greeks, you know, everybody built these amazing buildings. These were probably not their first effort. A few of them probably fell along the way. So they didn't have building codes, but they did have somebody saying, no, 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 you don't want to do it that way. And then over more time, energy and machinery enabled us to build yet larger buildings. And then there were all sorts of innovations. And then there had to be regulations to figure out whether those innovations were safe. And I think Steve might have a couple of comments.
Oh, one classic example of cause and effect was the Union Carbide chemical leak in Bhopal, India in 1984, killed 3,600 people, and it maimed thousands of other people. And the result of that was that the code people, the ICC now, but in previous years it was a different organization. They changed the codes because of that catastrophe, and specifically they addressed factory type, institutional, industrial type buildings. And the code is very specific about what you're allowed to do and not do in those types of buildings. And that's an example of cause and effect. There are thousands of examples, but normally the changes in the codes are written for a good reason.
Thank you. Well, just in case nobody can read this, there is another way to do the codes. This is the Code of Hammurabi from 1754 BC. And it contained 282 laws on contracts, wages, inheritance, construction. And number 229 simply says, if a builder build a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall in and kill its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. Number 230, if it kill the son of the owner, the son of the builder shall be put to death. So, there's an easier way to do that than all the codes that we have, but it's kind of frowned on these days. Yeah, Bob. Exactly. And in addition to that, the impact of energy codes goes beyond energy. So from 2010 to 2040, it is estimated that energy codes will save something like 138 billion. That there will be 900 million megatons avoided CO2, and energy reduction. And so there are a lot of statistics in terms of what it is saving. And then the early design, this is getting back to what Steve was saying about landscaping and siding. If you start early, then the savings can continue into the future. You can see the graphs that are over on the right. When it still looks like there's a gap to be met in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. There's some studies that are just coming out that are showing that may not be accurate, that with all the investments that have been made over the past couple of years in the building infrastructure law and in new technologies, that gap may have lessened significantly. So we're making progress.
Fast.
We need to make progress fast. Yes. Okay, so on to the New Mexico Residential Code. You can find that online, and there's some resources at the end of this talk, and some of them relate to where you can find these codes. But is issued by the Construction Industries Division, CID. And so they're the ones who issue the code as amended for New Mexico. Go ahead and change out. The one of the changes that was made for New Mexico is that most states do not have as many climate zones as we have. And so the climate zones are by town. And if you look in our code, you have to look up where you live and you'll see what climate zone you are in. That is not in the rest of the code, but we're just different. So that's one of the major adjustments. There are some others as well. Thank you. Ooh, this is hard to read too. So here are some of the general model code changes. The model code for 2021 is a 9% improvement. They also had additional efficiency packages, so you could go beyond the code. That part was dropped in New Mexico. Insulation value requirements were increased. And then there were changes for cavity floors, basements, sunrooms, heated garages. Some of those were also changed in New Mexico. Air leakage requirements, connection boxes, duct leakage, mechanical ventilation, and lighting efficiency. And New Mexico lowered that burden a little bit from the model, changed the space definitions, specified which code programs are recognized, adjusted U factors, fenestration requirements, and so on and so forth. And another change that's interesting that New Mexico did, everything else was kind of reducing from the model code, but we added in an appendix, which was the EV charging stations. So that's one that we are really focused on here. Steve, do you want to comment?
As far as as far as the codes go, you know, in residential construction, you're going to be looking at the IRC if it's new construction, or you're going to be looking at the existing residential building code. They're two separate codes. You can I don't know that you necessarily have to follow the existing building code. I think the IRC is a more powerful code than the existing building code. The existing building code is intended to reduce the severity of some of the changes that you have to make, and some of that is due to cost savings and practicality. You know, if you have a house with an 8-foot flat ceiling and you have a flat roof on top of it, it's really hard to put in a hardwired smoke alarm system. And so in some of the issues on the code, they will allow you to go to a system that is not necessarily hardwired in. And so there's some trade-offs that you can get by looking at the codes. Normally, you know, as a citizen, you know, you shouldn't have to do all that sort of research. And I can assure you that the staff here at the county, they're real darn familiar with the codes. And anybody who knows or uses the codes cannot possibly ever know everything that's in all of the codes. But what we do know is where to find the information. And so if you're experiencing any kind of a problem, or you have a question regarding a system that you're thinking about buying, a system that you have bought, you can get all sorts of technical support from the county. They can't design your system for you. You know, they can help you out and help you find areas that will facilitate you getting a building permit easier than if you undertake to do the whole thing on your own. There are also other design professionals locally that can be contacted. For instance, if you are stuck with putting a collecting system on your roof, you might want to talk to a structural engineer about doing an analysis of your roof, because the county is going to require that before they issue you a permit. They want to cover all their bases too, so be aware of that. You have more on this one?
You've got the next slide.
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, there's more than one way of doing things here, and none of them are super simple, but they are very effective at reaching your goal. There is a worksheet that you can go through and fill out, and that gives you a pretty accurate description. On the other hand, there's some things that I typically do, and I work closely with Mike, who's a plan checker for the county, and one of the things that I like to do is look at the entire system like a wall. And you know, the code's going to tell you you need R20 insulation in the wall. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that the insulation has to be R20, but the wall system itself has to be R20. And so if you look at the physics of what the wall is constructed of and how the air interacts with the wall, there are certain things that you can add that either to your U value or your R value, but the inside air film that exists on the surface of the wall doesn't move quite as quickly as the air in the rest of the building. And so it provides a little bit of insulation of 0.2 or something like that on the outside. And it's like 0.5 or 0.6 on the inside. And so you got a half-inch sheetrock. That's worth something. Then you got maybe a 6-inch wall cavity, and you got R19 insulation on that. If you need to get up to R20, calculate that half-inch sheathing that's on the outside. Calculate that stucco that's on the outside of the sheathing. Calculate that or add in that outside air film. And you'll find out that putting R19 insulation in your wall, actually, your wall system is going to be more than R21. So you don't have to go looking for expensive insulation. On the other hand, if you have a house, for instance, or structure with a 2x4 wall, chances are it's got R11 insulation in it. Well, there isn't a whole lot you can do to an R11 2x4 wall except add more insulation. So the trade-off becomes, where do you put it? Do you put the insulation on the inside and reduce your square footage by 1.5 inches? Do you put the insulation on the outside? What is your house made of? If your house is concrete block or adobe or some other mass, then you have to decide, do you want that mass on the inside of your house or do you want that mass on the outside of your house? If you have that mass on the inside of your house, your temperature swings in your house are going to go from wild to moderate. And that's what things like trom walls and 55-gallon drums of water, it's a storage system for your passive solar. And so if you are confronted with that, you have to make some sort of a decision. Do I want the mass inside the house? Is it going to be a solar house? Do I want quick recovery? If you have the mass outside of the house as a structural element, or to keep out the environment, then you can heat your house in a flash. You can heat your house with hot air. You can heat it with hot water. You can do a convective system with hot water. You can do an in-floor system with hot water. And water systems traditionally in the past have been associated with mass floor systems. In other words, concrete floors or some sort of a mass element of gypcrete or lightweight concrete oftentimes is floated in, and a tube system is installed in the mass. But there are systems now, one is called warm board, and it performs two functions. Warm board is a sheathing that you can put down on top of your floor joists but it also has already pre-designed and installed an aluminum skin on top of the decking material. And the decking material itself is almost an inch thick. And so it's easily going to span 24-inch center spacing on your joists. And it may span more than that. The thing being that the panel boards are basically 4x8 sheets of 1-inch thick plywood that has a groove routed in it that is in a pattern going back and forth. And the thing that's nice about this system is even though it employs the same technology that they use in the concrete floor systems, this system is almost instant gratification. Typically in a floor system with a concrete floor or a mass type floor, you turn your heat on at the end of August, and by the time middle of September rolls around, it's up to speed. And so it takes a while to get charged up, to get the battery charged up. But with a warm board, or you can use a liquid system with a convective radiator, and you get instant gratification. But what you don't want is that instant gratification type of heat trying to heat a mass of the inside of the house. So if you have a forced air system in your house, putting a big mass inside of your house is a real bad idea, because the transfer of the heat from the air to the mass is very slow. You want to have a direct transfer of the heat in whatever the liquid is you're using to the mass that it's trying to heat up. Air is a poor conductor of heat. So anyway, there are also lots of different systems. There's a list too long to mention as far as heating and cooling loads. But right now, one of the things I'm seeing that's most popular are the mini splits. And basically it's a heat pump that heats and cools all in one unit. And basically it's got a either wall, roof, or ground mounted condenser on the outside of the building, and it's got the condenser in it. And then it has all the heating and cooling exchange is done at the heat pump, and then it delivers either hot or cold to a unit inside of the house, or in some instances, if you have like one heat pump, one mini split, you can have like a 2, 3, 4 zones on it. So if you have a 2-bedroom house, living, dining, kitchen, you can heat and cool each bedroom separately. They have their own fan system that lives inside the rooms that you want to heat and cool. They're very efficient systems. They don't make a lot of noise. They don't move a lot of air, so they're really quiet. They're popular. But there are also other systems that come into play. Certainly, if you have an older house with a forced air system, you want to make sure that you pay attention to the maintenance on it. But there's some things that you can do to older systems. You can add filters and so on and so forth to make it a more healthy system to be in the house. But we haven't talked at all about passive systems. Passive heating and cooling systems are big, and people do use them all the time. One of my clients in White Rock had a front yard full of river rocks, and it faced the street. And they liked to sit on the front porch and visit with the neighbors, but it was impossible because all the river rock in the front yard turned into a giant furnace. And so we re-landscaped and put in some native grasses and some landscaping elements. The front porch became a patio in the front yard. to cover the patio, we put up an arbor. And I think the person who constructed it is here in the audience tonight. And the way we constructed it was so that if the way we did it was to reduce the amount of sunshine on the patio by 50%. And so we did that with 2x2 slats on 2-inch centers. And to further enhance that, if it wasn't going to be enough, we put some hooks in, and he had some grommets on some solar fabric that he could simply clip the solar fabric up and reduce the sun, take down, cut out 90% of the sunshine if he wanted. And if that wasn't enough, we put a misting system around two sides of the thing. And so what they did was put up the slats. They never put the solar fabric up. And I don't think they ever put the misting system up. But cutting the sunshine down by 50% on that front patio and changing from the river rock to a landscaped area reduced the heat by 15 degrees in the front yard. So that's significant. So don't overlook those. Those are some simple solutions. You know, a cool breeze coming off a front yard through a window and out a skylight at the high point in your ceiling, that's convection. It works every time. No power failure, nothing does it. So yeah, if you're going to put a penetration on your roof, put in an operable skylight or some sort of a vent. It'll help do amazing things.
Okay, so now you guys all know why you want to talk to an architect. Just a quick comment on the energy code ecosystem. You know, people here are on the left-hand side for the most part, the design team, the project team / applicant. That's the owner, the architectural team, engineering team, the modeler, commissioning agent, whoever is involved in that whole thing. And then on the other side, there's the program administrator or regulatory authority, the code official. And again, you guys are incredibly lucky, and the building inspector. So the goal is not to be in opposition. The goal is to work together to get the buildings that everybody wants built in a safe way. So, you know, that's really the whole point of this, is so that everybody understands a little bit more about what needs to be done to do that and work together. I have it on good authority, one of them sitting right here, that if anybody has any questions, please come in, call, whatever. I don't think Michael actually sleeps, but he does answer the phone. So if you have any questions, talk to him. Thanks. Then this last one is just some resources related to codes and some rebates and so on and so forth. So this is, you know, solar tax credit, energy efficiency, financing, et cetera, as well as some general resources that relate to some of the other things we talked about. And that's it. Oh, except there's the last word.
It may not be the last word, but there is some good news. As an architect, I have to get continuing ed every year, and the booklet that I received this year had a couple of things that were real interesting, but you know, there's a movement to try to bring more outside environment into the heated, conditioned indoor environment. But the thing that excited me the most was that Germany right now is developing a hydrogen gas production plant in Europe. And they are eventually looking at something like 300 megawatts coming out of it. And it's going to be, they're making the hydrogen, they're going to distribute the hydrogen in existing gas lines throughout Europe. And this is really, really good news, especially given what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia and the natural gas pipelines and so on and so forth. This is really good news. And it's also good news for all of us that have not yet bought a Tesla, because the internal combustion engine that you're all real familiar with is going to probably run on hydrogen one day. It is a volatile gas, but in reality, so is gasoline, and so is propane, and so is natural gas, so is butane. And, they're all fuels. Fuels, tend to be, they can be dangerous. Electricity can be dangerous, but the good news is this to produce hydrogen, I think, is starting to take hold. And never turn your back on nukes. Nuclear energy has been, is proven, is now, and will forever be a source of clean energy. And I think people are starting to get over their paranoia about the use of nuclear power. So, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff out there that we can do. We just need to start doing it.
Thank you. Over to you.
So we do have some tables outside. We do have koala insulation outside. They do a lot of insulation projects up here in Los Alamos County, so we did ask for them to come up here. I don't know if they already left. Did koala insulation leave? Can you ask one of the representatives if they would like to speak to the community? But I do apologize. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Michael Marquez. I'm the plans examiner here in Los Alamos County. I did coordinate with Sandra and Steve to get this presentation out for you guys. It's really important that we speak to the community, what we're representing to the contractors in the area as well. So we had given this type of presentation back in May to the contractors, and we wanted to make sure we did the same thing to the community, so they know our concerns and we're all on the same page together. I know we also have Abby, who's probably going to speak a little bit too as well from the utilities division. But was Koala not going to come up? No. Okay, so if you guys have any questions for Koala insulation, they do have a table out there if you have any questions for them. Other than that, just a couple of things that we are going to be letting our contractors know in January is the res check is not working right now with the state of New Mexico. And that's because CID, they made some amendments to some insulation factors, and that's the ceiling insulation being from R60. The state of New Mexico kept it at R49, and the same for the insulation around the slab, which you don't have to go 4 feet here. We're going to keep it at 2 feet. So if you are doing res checks, we are communicating with CID to try to get that taken care of. So if you're doing a res check, unfortunately, it's not going to work right now. Here's Abby.
Thank you. Oh, gosh. I'm Abby Hayward. I'm the Water and Energy Conservation Coordinator for the public utilities here. You guys might be a little overwhelmed if you are looking at this information going, where do I start? What do I do? How do I know what my house is at? What? So just to tell you some things up front, the Department of Public Utilities, if you're not aware, does not offer utility rebates and incentives like a lot of other ones in the state. This is because of our New Mexico state constitution. Most of you are probably aware of that, but if you're not, we cannot legally offer you any. But I am here to tell you that the New Mexico State Energy Conservation and Management Division of MNERD has recently released their rebate section for the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act monies. So if you haven't had a chance to check out that, go on their website. You can just type in New Mexico ECAM, ECAM, and that'll get you to where their rebates and incentives are all housed. And that'll help you understand what you're eligible for, what you can pursue right now, what is coming. It covers doors, windows, insulation, a lot of energy efficiency improvements in general. That'll help you get started if you're a little overwhelmed. And then I also want to promote that if you haven't already, there are 2 portals on utilities that you can access to help see what you're using. And maybe you can go on there and you're like, wow, something's way out of whack that I don't think I'm using this much, but it's showing we are. You can check out your utility self portal, which will just talk about the billing side of things and how much you're paying every month. And then we have our automated meter infrastructure system that'll go in depth more on your consumption side. So if you have any questions about what you're seeing, I'm here to help you interpret things. We can go through it a little bit more in depth if you want. Try to figure out if there's any underlying trends that you're like, man, I just do not know why this bill is so high. That's what we're here for, to help you break that down. And I can tell you from my own insulation experience, as soon as we put our attic insulation in one of our houses, our gas consumption dropped by 50%. So if you're looking for somewhere to start, insulation's a good one.
Any questions? We do. Just call our office if you want. The ladies can either email it to you or they can make a copy and have you come and pick it up. Yes, I do. 505-662-8120. Yes. Anyone else? Rob? All right. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for attending. We do appreciate you attending.